Alright, fellow builders, so welcome back to the timing belt and water pump change on the 05 Legacy GT. Last video we got everything torn apart, we got the water pump out, timing belt off, and we found the timing was off by about 5 teeth, the jump timing. We're going to go ahead and set that timing back to where it should be. We are going to install the new water pump and the new timing belt, and we're going to put everything back together. So since last video, one of the things that I did off camera was I reset the tensioner. Now, you can do this in a vise. I used my little press, very easy. This is a 2mm Allen key. Fits right through perfectly. It does actually, the amount of pressure that's on it, it actually does bend your Allen key just a little bit. So when you go to pull it out, you might have to, give it a little extra tug. But other than that, it goes right in. Make sure you go slow because this has like fluid in it to prevent it from going in or out really fast. So when I did it on the press, just had to like slowly give it pressure, and it pressed it right down enough to get this in. So it was pretty straightforward. But before we install that, we got to put the new water pump on. So here we got a new water pump and 2 gaskets that go with the water pump are obviously this one, which is a metal gasket, and it's actually just a little bent. We gotta straighten that out. But yeah, so a metal gasket that'll go on like this, like so. Boom. And then this rubber one goes right here. How's this work? Just like this. Goes on there like that. And this will seal up against the side of the oil pump down in there. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get 2 bolts put into the pump, just like this, just to hold the gasket in place. And we already put this seal in. And while we're doing this, oh, you know what, actually, real quick, so I actually have to put the other hose back on for the oil cooler. There, got that hose on. Now we're gonna try and get these other 2 hoses in here before we go and get everything tightened up, and luckily these hoses pretty much slide right on. Yep, okay. Hoses slid right on. That's good. Pretty much got it all lined up. Now we just gotta get it pushed into place and get a bolt started. Same here. There we go. Okay, we got a pair of bolts started. Now we should be able to feed more in. Start those as well. Should stay for the most part lined up. Now that they're all started, they pretty much go right in. So that's good. Now the torque pattern on this is very simple. It's 8.7 foot-pounds twice. So start here at this one, about 2-3 o'clock, and you just go clockwise. And 8.7 foot-pounds. So our little torque wrench here is inch-pounds. So 12 times 8.7. 104.4. Okay, so we're at 104. I'm going to do 104 once, and then I'll go back and do 105 on the second lap. So there's. And there we go, all torqued. We got the water pump installed. Now we're going to put the thermostat in. And this thermostat, like I said, Mishimoto. I read the part number. I'll put it in the description. This is a 68 degree thermostat, 60 degrees Celsius, and it actually has its own gasket. So we're gonna save the one that came with the kit with our old thermostat, just in case this thermostat ever gives us issues. But, like I said, right there says Mishimoto, 68 degrees Celsius. Okay, so we're gonna install it, and this, it's got the little, you know, that little bleeder port in it with the little thing in it. I don't know what this is called, but it lets air, trapped air, go through and a very small amount of water. So that goes at the top. So thermostat's in. Next is, before we put that housing on, we're going to want to put these clamps back on, because we probably won't be able to get to them later. And as soon as it got hot, it would just blow those off. So there we go. Now these get torqued to about half what the other bolts were torqued to. These are a lot smaller and they're not really holding quite as much on. So I think these are 4.7. So just over half. So these are going to be 56 inch-pounds. Okay, so those are nice and tight. We can go ahead and do this. This can go back in here. There. Put the clamp back on. This clamp, you gotta be careful, because the timing cover, if you have it straight up where it's easy to get to, which is kind of what I like to do, the timing cover won't be able to go back on. It would hit the clamp. So get it down there and out of the way. And that's it for the water pump. So like I showed, we got the 2mm pin holding the tensioner compressed until we get the belt on. So this threads in right here, like that. And then the geared one here, go like that. And these are torqued to 30 foot-pounds. Well, it's 29 foot-pounds plus or minus like 2.5. Next up is the timing belt itself. So here's the timing belt. Before we put the timing belt on, we need to make sure that these two cams are in time. So this top one actually moved a little bit, and as you can see, like, you know, they've got some motion before they hit the valves. So this one's basically, this one right up against the valves is in time, and then this one you have to time off of it. So we've got the mark on the side lining up with the timing cover, same up here. Okay, and then timing mark on the side, and the double hash marks right here that have to line up with each other. So they're lined up. It's gonna move. This one's gonna move a little because they're just kind of freewheeling until you get the belt on. So we got the gears all lined up. We've got the tensioner in with the pin still in. We got all the idlers on and torqued. So next step is going to be the timing belt itself. Now, let's see, it has marks on it. So the timing belt has lines on it. This one is like a dotted line, and all the rest are solid. Now the dotted line goes on the crank pulley. So we're going to start, though, kind of going around these idlers. So this is where it gets a little tricky. You have to basically line everything up all at once without letting anything jump. And it wants to jump at all times, basically. So we're going to get these all lined up first. So this line right here that you see is lined up with the yellow mark on the cam gear and with the mark on the timing cover. Now, basically pull it tight, hold it tight against the cam gear, get it onto the other cam gear. That one's lined up. I'm going to clamp it. Ever so lightly into place on that bottom one, because that cam gear down there is kind of the hard one to get to. We got the belt on, so there's the dotted line that goes on the crank pulley. Then you have a line here, lines with that hash mark, a line down at the exhaust on this side, and then a yellow line for the intake on this side, and a yellow line for the exhaust on this side. Now, obviously these other pulleys don't matter, they're just idler kind of tension, keep everything tight. And you might have to get everything to line up right, adjust this kind of back and forth, like it's like half a tooth probably. Yeah, it's not even a full tooth, so you might have to just wiggle it to get a little more slack on one side or the other. And then once you have everything let go, you can pull this pin, but actually make sure stuff. So right now the slack in the belt is basically right here, and if we go back this way just a little bit, line that back up with top dead center. This one's lined up perfectly up there. They're lined up perfectly with each other and on the side, and same over here, those haven't moved. And now all of the slack in the line is actually being taken up by the pressure of the tensioner right there. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this pin now and let it have full pressure on the belt right here. And then we're going to take our vice grips off over here, as well as take off our lock. So loosen up and loosen up. And these are magnetic, so they're kind of stuck in there. And now, before going any further, you want to run this through its paces. Basically making sure nothing falls off the pulleys, nothing jumps a tooth, nothing is hit, no bolts you installed in here are messed up. So we're going to spin this over by hand essentially a few times, and every time it comes around, every 2 revolutions of the crank, we're going to check the 4 cam pulleys to make sure that they're still lined up. These lines, when you're doing this check, it'll be a while before these line back up with everything, but the marks on your cam gears and your crank gear will, every 2 revolutions, will be back in line where they're supposed to be. So we're gonna go ahead and start spinning this over. And you're gonna feel resistance on the compression stroke of each piston. So don't be alarmed. So right there's 1 revolution, and obviously right now nothing's lined up, so we're gonna keep going. That's on compression right there. Okay. And now we're back. We're back at top dead center. So, check everything again. Our mark on the front of the cam gear there is lined up with the mark on the oil pump. Our mark up here is perfectly vertical, and the green lines are lined up, and then our white mark down there is basically 90 degrees out. This one up here, perfectly lined up as well, with the double green dashes lined up, and then the other one down here is 90 out the other way. So it looks pretty good so far. I'm going to spin it over a couple more times by hand, probably at least 2 more full cycles of the cam gears to make sure everything is staying good and give everything kind of, let it sit, like settle in on all the pulleys and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be back in just a minute. So real quick before we go any further, so I actually bought a timing belt guide for this car because the factory ones are like a stamped steel kind of, and they make billet ones, whatever, they kind of just look cool. But come to find out, it's not a stock piece on automatics from what I can tell from some research online. And I was curious, I was looking it up because this one doesn't have one. So yeah, I guess the automatics don't have a timing belt guide. I don't know if it was something on the manuals to basically prevent them from, like when you're first taking off from a stop, to make sure that this doesn't jump time, like the sudden shock on the crank with the clutch. But I'm not going to worry about it then. These didn't come with them stock, so I'll probably just save it because I know my Subaru doesn't have it. So I'll just end up putting it on mine because that one's getting manual swapped. So since we're not waiting on that, we can just carry on. Since we're done with the cam lock tool, we can go ahead and put this cover back on the cam gear. And don't forget that the little bolts on here have a flat washer and a lock washer, so you need both of those on there. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not gonna bore you guys with putting this cover back on, so I'm gonna go ahead, put these covers back on, and I will come back when we're ready to put the crank pulley on. We got the covers all installed now. One little thing to note when you are installing them is they're just little 10mm bolts. Some of them go into metal, but others just go into little metal inserts that are in plastic. So you need to be careful not to tighten them down too much because you can break the plastic. Or if you tighten them down too much, when you go to remove it next time, it'll break the plastic trying to take them out. So just a little word of advice: you don't need to crank them on there when you're putting those covers back on, but just kind of hand tight with a ratchet, and that's it. And now we're going to be putting the crank pulley back on. Now the crank pulley is keyed, and you can't see the key right now, I don't think. Maybe you can. It's right here kind of on the bottom side, so you know, can't really mess it up. Like, there's only one way it can go. There it goes, and it slides all the way on. And put the bolt in. Okay. Bolt. .22 socket. Tighten it down. And now we're going to torque this to 130 foot-pounds. Now there's a lot of information out there saying like 94-ish foot-pounds, I think, or 95, something like that. And I suspect my Turbo Legacy, my 92 Legacy, somebody did that because the crank was wiped out. What I mean by that is that little keyway that the pulley engages with, basically they roll over, and then the crank gear can't keep time anymore, and you gotta change the crank. And changing the crank is the most involved thing on a Subaru because you're literally breaking the block all the way down to nothing. It's not like a V engine where you can just drop the crank out the bottom, leave everything together. No, you have to tear it completely apart. So I had to do that on my 92 Subaru, and it kind of sucked. So anyways, I guess a lot of that started with an old factory service manual or an old like Haynes or Chilton manual that said that they were all supposed to be 94 or whatever. And in reality, I believe anything other than the 2-liter is supposed to be 130. This one is 130. And my 92 Legacy, I do to 130. So we are going to do the same thing that we did to break it loose. We're going to do that to tighten it. It works exactly the same way. You just put the little loop here on the other side and go to town. So shouldn't be nearly as bad. We're still going. So this belt's trash, so we're not going to use it again. We have new belts that we're going to put on, and that's basically what we're up to now. Now we can put the accessory belts back on. We can put the radiator back in. We can hook up the water line, the upper and lower radiator hose, the intake. We can put everything back together. Essentially, the timing belt job is done. What we have to do now is all the little follow-on stuff. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Alright, fellow builders, well, that's going to wrap it up for another episode of Will's Builds. I hope you enjoyed our little how-to video on doing a timing belt on the 2005 Subaru Legacy. If you're not following us on social media, we have Instagram and Facebook page where we regularly post photos and updates on when new videos are coming out. So the links for that will be in the description, as well as all of the parts and special tools we used in this project. So if you haven't watched the first half, go check that out. That will be linked right here somewhere. And if you're not subscribed, get subscribed for new updates and new videos as they come out. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep building.